Welcome everybody to our meditation class. We're starting a new series this week called Freedom from Painful Emotions. And so we're going to be looking today at pacifying our anger and frustration. But throughout this series, we're going to be looking at various unpeaceful states of mind that cause our mind to be uncontrolled, what we call delusions, because they're distortions in our mind. So before we begin the teaching, it's very important that we allow our mind to become settled and more clear, and also more peaceful and more inspired. So to do that, we're going to engage in a breathing meditation, following the steps of meditation, seeking and finding the object of our meditation, which will be the feeling that our breath is making just inside the tip of our nose as we breathe completely, normally, and naturally. That part's very important because it's about the feeling of our breath, not so much about our breath itself. But because we're always breathing, that feeling is always there. And so it makes a wonderful object of meditation that's very easy to seek and find. So we can spend most of our time trying to hold it in the center of our attention and remain focused on it for as long as possible, which means that we're ignoring everything else that appears to our mind. We don't want to get into any type of struggle to eliminate things from our mind. We just simply want to ignore them. So that goes for sounds, it goes for other thoughts and various other sensations that we may experience in our mind. But if we're completely focused on our breath, those thoughts will seem over time to go to the background of our mind, and our mind will start to settle and become peaceful, which is the outcome of this meditation that we're looking for. And with a peaceful mind, then we'll discover that our thoughts become fewer and fewer, which will add to the clarity and peace of our mind in this meditation. And all this can be accomplished simply by remaining focused on the feeling that our breath is making just inside the tip of our nose. So if you discover you're following a thought or a sound or some other sensation, the moment you notice that you did that, simply release your attention from whatever you followed and go back again to the steps, seeking and finding the feeling that our breath is making just inside the tip of our nose. It's a little bit cooler as we breathe in and a little bit warmer as we breathe out. So it's easy to seek and find, so we can spend most of our time practicing holding it in the center of our attention and remaining focused on it so that our mind will become more and more peaceful and more clear. Okay, so find a comfortable meditation posture. Hopefully you're in a space where you have a little bit of privacy and that you're not concerned about responsibilities for the hour and 15 minutes of this class. But of course, if you're on call, that's perfectly fine. You just have your phone available, and if you get called, you come out of meditation, take the call, and go right back into meditation afterwards, or tune back into the class. The nice advantage of these recorded classes is if you do get interrupted while you're trying to listen to the teaching, you always have an opportunity to listen again and also do the meditation again at a time when you're not so busy. So that's one of the advantages of recording. So these classes are online from Tuesday through Saturday. And of course, you have to sign up for them, but nevertheless, you can watch them at a time that's convenient for you. Okay, so let's find a posture for meditation with our back straight. Hopefully you're in a reasonably straight back chair without arms. And if your chair tilts back, use a little pillow to help your back to be straight. If you're on a cushion, have your hips higher in the back than in the front. And any cross-legged position that's comfortable will be appropriate. If you can get into half fascia with one foot on the opposite thigh, that's a very stable meditation posture, but only if you could remain comfortable in that posture during the entire meditation. Okay. So if you're sitting in a chair, you can sit either cross-legged or you can have your feet firmly planted on the floor, not crossed in any way. You may want to put your hands in the traditional meditation posture of right hand on left with thumbs touching, which represents the perfect concentration of highly realized meditation masters and enlightened beings. Have your head well balanced over your straight back, tilted down just a little bit, with your eyes lightly closed, or if your eyelids are very stable, a little bit open, letting some light in, which keeps you more alert during the meditation. It's very useful to keep your tongue resting against the back of your upper teeth so your mouth will remain moist during meditation. Having assumed this posture, check your body for any points of discomfort, make any little adjustments that will help you to feel more comfortable. We'll create an intention that our meditation and listening to the class will help us to put the teaching into practice so that we can benefit all the living beings in our close circle and everyone that we think about or meet in our daily life, including animals. And we also want to have the intention to follow the steps of meditation so that we can actually gain the power to make changes in our mind. Using your imagination, allow your awareness to go to your heart center, which is in the middle of your body at the level of your heart, not your biological heart. It's the location of your root mind, and all other minds stem from here. And when you locate yourself there, you'll be able to observe your thoughts as they appear from the mind itself and disappear back into the clarity of the mind itself. And from among the many thoughts that are appearing to your mind, seek and find the feeling that your breath is making just inside the tip of your nose, keeping your breathing completely normal. Once you find it, hold it in the center of your attention and remain focused on it for as long as possible, ignoring everything else in your mind. pause for a moment to rejoice over any mental peace that you've been able to create within your mind. This mental peace connects us to the mind of all the holy beings. And if we wish, we can open our hearts to receive blessings in the form of lights and nectars, which, if we allow, will fill our mind, increasing our mental peace and inspiration. Create a wish to sustain any mental peace that you're experiencing in your mind as you gently come out of meditation. So today's teaching is pacifying our anger and frustration. And I'm teaching from two books by our lineage holder, who's in the picture behind me, Venerable Geshe Kelsang Gyatso Rinpoche. The first is How to Understand the Mind. And the second, where most of the teaching is coming from, is How to Solve Our Human Problems, which has most of the book is about helping us to subdue anger. A wonderful. So this entire series is freedom from painful emotions, and painful emotions are caused by delusions. So the definition of delusion, because we need to know what a delusion is a mental factor that arises from inappropriate attention and that functions to make the mind unpeaceful and uncontrolled. So we'll go into what inappropriate attention is when we look at anger. Important thing for us to know is if we did not have delusions, we would experience only peace and contentment. So imagine what that would be like to have a completely peaceful, contented mind, even in the midst of COVID, in the midst of the financial struggles that so many people have, in the midst of all of our social justice issues and every other suffering in samsara. This is quite possible to develop a peaceful and contented mind. That's why we need this teaching, because it really gives us many ways to do this. When our delusions are not functioning strongly, our mind is relatively tranquil and contented. So again, you know that from your own experience. You can think of times when you feel relatively tranquil and contented. You don't have very many unhappy thoughts bothering your mind. But as soon as anger, jealousy, or desirous attachment, which is also called uncontrolled desire, arise, they destroy our peace of mind like a sudden storm destroying the tranquility of an ocean. So we know that. We could just think of something that makes us unhappy, and all of a sudden our mind is agitated. Even if we are in good physical health, when delusions manifest, our mind becomes ill at ease. So we should observe our mind for an hour, for a few hours, even for a day, and see how often peaceful minds arise and how often deluded or neutral minds arise. If we're not well trained in Buddha's teachings and putting them into practice, it is likely that our deluded or unpeaceful minds and our neutral minds will far outnumber our peaceful minds. Such a sad state of affairs, but it's the reality of our being trapped in the cycle of impure life unless we've gained the power to train our mind. Why is it so difficult to maintain a peaceful mind? Maybe you've asked yourself that question. The only reason is that we have so many delusions in our mind. External problems do not have the power to disturb our mind unless we respond to them by developing these unpeaceful states of mind that really destroy our happiness. If we have no delusions, even our enemies cannot destroy our peace of mind. So all of that comes from how to understand the mind. Now we're going to switch books to how to solve our human problems because it's such a thorough commentary on how to recognize, reduce, and eliminate anger in our mind. So anger is one of the most common and destructive delusions, and it afflicts our mind almost every day. We can check that out. How many times do you feel annoyed, irritated, unhappy, out of sorts, maybe even outright angry or holding resentment? All of these are shades of anger in our mind. To solve the problem of anger, we first need to recognize the anger within our mind. This part is important, the next step. Acknowledge how it harms both ourselves and others, and appreciate the benefits of being patient in the face of difficulties. We then need to apply practical methods in our daily life to reduce our anger and finally to prevent it from arising at all. And that's quite possible. We can get to the point where we won't have anger arising in our mind. And then with the higher realizations, we can completely eliminate anger from our mind. So even if a little bit of anger arises under a tremendous provocation, it still will be so little if we've trained our mind that we can easily subdue it. What is anger? So we need to understand what anger is before we can work on reducing it and eliminating it. Anger is a deluded mind that focuses on an animate or inanimate object. So that means a person, an animal, or a thing, or an experience. Okay, next step is our mind feels it to be unattractive, and then we use inappropriate attention to exaggerate its bad qualities. In other words, we basically create a fantasy about how horrible the situation is or how awful it is that we have to put up with this or experience this. And then anger becomes full-blown, where we develop a wish to harm either that person or that thing or even the experience. We can have a wish to harm. For example, when we are angry with our partner, at that moment, he or she appears to us as unattractive or unpleasant. So you can think of, if you're in a relationship, the experiences you've had of being angry with your partner, or even if you're not in a relationship, perhaps you can think of past relationships when this happened. Okay? We then exaggerate his or her bad qualities by focusing only on those aspects that irritate us. And at the same time, we're ignoring all his or her good qualities and kindness. In other words, we're doing this in our mind. We're creating this exaggerated, horrible person in our mind because we're annoyed about something. And so we're building our anger until we have built a mental image of an intrinsically faulty person. We then wish to harm him or her in some way, probably by criticizing or disparaging him or her. Because it is based on an exaggeration, anger is an unrealistic mind. The intrinsically faulty person or thing that it focuses on does not, in fact, exist. So we know that because when we get over our anger with our partner, we're back in a state of really liking our partner. And so everything that we imagined that was horrible and everything that we forgot that was good, now we are not focusing on whatever was annoying us, and now we're focusing on the good qualities, and so we now can have some love in our heart. So it's very important for us to understand this step of creating this imaginary horrible person in our mind, because that really fuels our anger. And that's the step that creates the wish to harm, is this inappropriate attention that creates a fantasy of, at that moment, a horrible person that you feel doesn't love you or has harmed you, or, you know, how many times have I told him or her not to do that thing, but they did it, and so they don't listen to me, so they don't love me. You know, we create all sorts of unrealistic ideas in our mind as we fuel our anger with these types of thoughts. Okay. So the main thing that we need to learn is to watch our mind and catch anger in its beginning stages. Okay. But to do that, we have to have motivation to do it. So we have to understand how destructive anger is. Venerable Geshe Kelsang says, there is nothing more destructive than anger. It destroys our peace and happiness in this life and impels us to engage in negative actions that lead to untold suffering in our future lives related to the law of karma. When we harm, we're creating the cause for our future suffering. And anger is one of the essential ingredients in our wish to harm. Anger is by nature a painful state of mind. Whenever we develop anger, our inner peace immediately disappears, and even our body becomes tense and uncomfortable. So don't we know that? We are so restless that we find it nearly impossible to fall asleep, and whatever sleep we do manage to get is fitful and unrefreshing. And if we're really angry, we often have nightmares. It is impossible to enjoy ourselves when we are angry, and even the food we eat seems unpalatable. So again, as I'm reading what Venerable Geshe Kelsang says, please try to apply this in your own experience when you've been angry, because this is how it's going to go from just intellectual understanding to heartfelt understanding, is if we apply it in our own daily life. Anger transforms even a normally attractive person into an ugly red-faced demon. So just think of when someone's been angry with you, what they look like. I mean, they're rather frightening. When people are really angry, they actually look really scary. And so when you're really angry, you look really scary too. We grow more and more miserable when we're angry, and no matter how hard we try, we cannot control our emotions. This is when it really is getting going in a full-blown way. One of the most harmful effects of anger is that it robs us of our reason and good sense. In fact, this is, I would say, something that's quite terrible about anger. Wishing to retaliate against those whom we think have harmed us, we expose ourselves to great personal danger merely to exact petty revenge. To get even for perceived injustices or slights, we are prepared. So listen to this list, because you may have had some of these experiences. To jeopardize our job, to jeopardize our relationships, and even the well-being of our family and children. So many, many people have fights in front of their children. It's very distressing to children. Perhaps you can remember when you were a child, when your own parents were fighting, how horrible it is. When we are angry, we lose all freedom of choice, driven here and there by an uncontrollable rage. That's what happens when people are shouting at each other. And they're usually shouting all sorts of, they're going for the jugular, and they're shouting all sorts of harmful things that they know will pierce the sensibilities of the other person. And often they precipitate a separation by saying, I don't know why we stay together. You know, I think we should separate. And that begins the cycle of separation. For many, many people separate when out of anger. Anger is particularly destructive in relationships. A couple may genuinely love one another, but if they frequently get angry with each other, the times when they are happy together will become fewer and fewer and further between. Eventually, there will come a point when before they have recovered from one argument, the next has already begun. So maybe you had a failed relationship where this happened. Like a flower choked by weeds, love cannot survive in such circumstances. And unfortunately, there are sometimes people who stay together, but their main form of communication is fighting. And it's very difficult to be around people who are fighting. It's difficult, particularly for their children, but even when their children grow up, you know, they dread coming home because they know that their parents are continually bickering at each other in one form, one way or another. It is through our anger and hatred that we transform people into enemies. We generally assume that anger arises when we encounter a disagreeable person. But actually, this is really important, actually, it is the anger already within us that transforms the person into our imagined foe. This is what's happening with couples who are constantly bickering with each other. They feel like their partner is a foe, but out of attachment, they stay together. But again, they've created these imaginary enemies of each other. It's a very sad state of affairs when that's happening. So why do we get angry? This is important. Anger is a response to feelings of unhappiness, which in turn arise. So check this out again in your own experience. Whenever we meet with unpleasant circumstances, whenever we are prevented from fulfilling our wishes, or forced into a situation we dislike. In short, whenever we have to put up with something we would rather avoid, our uncontrolled mind, notice that word, uncontrolled mind, reacts by immediately feeling unhappy. In other words, we think, I shouldn't have to put up with this, or I shouldn't be in this experience. That's our self-important speaking, as if somehow we should be different from everybody else who has to put up with these situations. This uncomfortable feeling can easily turn into anger, and we become even more disturbed than before. So this can happen at work, it can happen at home, it can happen in just daily situations, you know, like being frustrated because the internet isn't working when you want to have a Zoom conference with someone, or you want to listen to something or follow something on the internet. I mean, we have very short fuses in our society in general. You know, we have this idea that everything should work perfectly for us. And of course, things never work perfectly for us. We have that experience over and over again. But each time we have the experience out of a bad habit, we tend to get annoyed or irritated. And so we already have the bad situation, and now we're layering unhappy feelings on top of the bad situation. So anger is just so destructive. Every day we encounter hundreds of situations we do not like, from stubbing our toe or having a disagreement with our partner, to discovering our house is burned down or that we have cancer. In other words, we encounter small things and we encounter big things, big sufferings. And our normal reaction to all these occurrences is to become unhappy and then angry. So again, check this out in your own experience. However, try as we might, we cannot prevent unpleasant things from happening to us. We all have this idea that we should have been able to control things, that they shouldn't happen to us. But in fact, they always happen to us, just like they always happen to everyone. We cannot promise that for the rest of the day, you just take today, for example, when you're listening to this teaching, nothing bad will happen to us. We cannot even promise that we will be alive to see the end of the day. In the cycle of impure life, samsara, we are not in control of what happens to us. So I had a good experience of that this morning when I placed my teapot that I make offerings, my offerings with, on the back of the toilet. So I had it there, and I was going to the restroom, and it slipped off. And amazingly, because we have a tile floor, the whole thing didn't break, but places chipped off of it. So that's a good example of the type of things that happen on a daily basis. Something we didn't anticipate, we couldn't control. I've placed my teapot many, many times on the back of the toilet in the morning before I fill it with water. It has never slipped off until this morning. So I had a choice. I could either get angry about it and be terribly disappointed and, you know, indulge in my attachment to the teapot when it wasn't broken, and now I have the broken teapot and feel terrible about it. Or I could decide, I'm not going to go there. I don't want that in my mind. You know, of course things break. I mean, this is the cycle of impure life. Of course things happen that I have no control over. So I'm going to keep my mind peaceful and happy and remember that this is a lesson for me. It's a spiritual lesson on the impermanence of things. And naturally, what, you know, disintegration is the outcome of production. So this is a normal and natural thing. So why get upset about it? Methods to gain release from the crippling delusion of anger exist and have proven their effectiveness whenever people have sincerely put them into practice. So that's the key. We actually have to put the methods into practice in our own daily life. And there is no reason why they cannot work for us as well. So here's something to use your imagination about. I think it's a wonderful thing to imagine. Imagine what the world would be like if we all conquered our anger. Just think. The danger of war would evaporate. Armies would become unnecessary. And soldiers would have to look elsewhere for work. Machine guns, tanks, and nuclear weapons, instruments useful only to the angry mind, could be put away as all conflicts, from wars between nations to arguments between individuals, came to an end. How wonderful when everyone learns how to subdue their anger and cherish each other. This is what the world will be like. Okay, so what do we do about it? How do we begin to control it? Having understood the many faults of anger, and that part's really important because that gives us the motivation to actually make changes in our mind to learn how to control anger. We should watch our mind closely at all times. As soon as we notice our mind starting to get agitated or annoyed or irritated or out of sorts. For example, when dwelling on someone's faults and blaming him or her for the unpleasant feelings in our mind, we should immediately recall the faults of anger, remembering that getting angry will solve nothing and only create more suffering for both ourselves and others. We should then make the effort to channel our mind in a more constructive direction. If we are able to recognize a negative train of thought before it develops into full-blown anger, it is not too hard to control it. If we can do this, there's no danger of our anger being bottled up and turning into resentment. Controlling anger and repressing anger are two very different things. When we control anger, we see exactly what is going on in our mind. We acknowledge honestly the angry stirrings in our mind for what they are. In other words, we patiently look at them. We realize that allowing them to grow will only result in suffering of ourselves, and then we create suffering for others. And then we make a free and conscious decision to respond more constructively. Since it is impossible to fulfill all our desires or to stop unwanted things from happening to us, we need to find a different way of relating to frustrated desires and unwanted occurrences. We need to learn patient acceptance. So this is how we're going to respond more constructively. Patience is a mind that is able to accept fully and happily whatever occurs. So instead of getting annoyed when we're unhappy about something, we think to ourselves, wait a minute, there's no reason to be unhappy here. I'm going to practice patience. I want to keep my mind peaceful and happy. And that way, my mind won't disturb me and I won't disturb others. It's so much better to have a peaceful and happy mind than an irritated and angry mind. It is much more than just gritting our teeth and putting up with things. That's a form of anger, actually. Being patient means to welcome wholeheartedly whatever arises, having given up the idea that things should be other than what they are. So that's usually why we start to get irritated, annoyed, and angry, is that we have an idea of what we think should be happening that is not happening. But it's just our idea. I mean, what is happening is what is our actual experience. Our idea of what should be happening is simply our own imagination. And life doesn't work according to us. So it's so important that we align ourselves with what actually is happening and to accept it and welcome it wholeheartedly. It is always possible to be patient. So there are no exceptions. There's no situation so bad that it cannot be accepted patiently with an open, accommodating, and peaceful heart. If we practice the patience of voluntarily accepting suffering, we can maintain a peaceful mind even when we're experiencing suffering and pain. If we maintain this peaceful and positive state of mind through the force of our mindfulness, in other words, through controlling our mind and reminding ourselves, I'm practicing patience even though I'm suffering. I'm going to make this a valuable experience for me, keep my mind patient, and develop compassion for those who are suffering even worse than I am. So if we maintain this peaceful and positive state of mind through the force of mindfulness, unhappy minds will have no opportunity to arise. On the other hand, if we allow ourselves to dwell on unhappy thoughts, there will be no way for us to prevent anger from arising. For this reason, Geshe Chekula says, always rely upon a happy mind alone. In other words, we can keep our mind happy and peaceful in every single situation if we learn how to practice patience and add a dose of love and compassion to it. As mentioned above, the main reason we become happy is because our wishes are not fulfilled or we have to deal with an unpleasant situation. However, as Shantideva says in the guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life, and if you're attending these teachings regularly, you know this is my favorite quote, and this quote that I try to live by. If something could be remedied, why be unhappy about it? And if there is no remedy for it, there's still no point in being unhappy. That is just such a beautiful piece of advice. If something can be remedied, why be unhappy about it? And if there is no remedy for it, there is still no point in being unhappy. Venerable Geshe Kelsang says, if there is a way to remedy an unpleasant, difficult situation, what point is there in being unhappy? I mean, we can do something about it. We should put our energy towards to correcting the situation instead of wasting our energy on unhappiness and anger. On the other hand, if it is completely impossible to remedy the situation or to fulfill our wishes, there's also no reason to get upset. Because how will becoming unhappy help? That's a really good question. How will becoming unhappy and then getting angry help if we can't change the situation? Anger is completely useless, whether we can change a situation or whether we can't change a situation. It only functions to make us miserable, to create more suffering in the present, and to cause us to harm others and to create our future suffering. Anger is our worst enemy. This line of reasoning is very useful because we can apply it to any situation. So patient acceptance does not necessarily mean that we do not take practical steps to improve our situation. I think that's very important to understand. Of course, we're going to take practical steps to improve our situation, but we don't have to be angry to do that. If it is possible to remedy the situation, then of course we should. But to do this, we do not need to become unhappy and impatient. For example, when we have a headache, there's no contradiction between practicing patience and taking medicine. But until the medicine takes effect, we need to accept whatever discomfort we feel with a calm and patient mind. And if the medicine doesn't work very well, we still need to accept whatever suffering we have with a calm and patient mind because it reduces the suffering. If instead of accepting our present pain, we become unhappy and fight against it, we will just become tense. And as a result, it will take longer to get rid of our headache. For as long as we're in the cycle of some impure life or samsara, we cannot avoid unpleasant, difficult situations and a certain amount of physical discomfort. So when have you ever had a day where your body didn't have various aches and pains? I mean, we forget about this, but it happens every day. And as you get older, or if you're an athlete, it happens more and more and more. It's just the nature of our being born in bodies like this in the cycle of impure life. But by training our mind to look at frustrating situations in a more realistic manner, namely that they happen to everyone, including me, so this isn't out of the ordinary, so I need to protect my mind by practicing patience, we can free ourselves from a lot of unnecessary mental suffering. In reality, most of our emotional problems are nothing more than a failure to accept things as they are. So think about that. Apply it to your own life. Such an important statement. I'm going to read it again. In reality, most of our emotional problems are nothing more than a failure to accept things as they are. In which case, it is patient acceptance rather than attempting to change externals that is the solution. Because no matter how we try to change things, we can't change many things. We don't have control over many types of suffering. If we can make a difference, of course we want to. But where we can't make a difference, we're going to give ourselves so much more protection if we keep our mind peaceful and happy by practicing patience. We should remember that every opportunity to develop anger is also an opportunity to develop patience. A relationship in which there's a lot of friction and conflict of interest is also an unrivaled opportunity to erode away our self-cherishing and self-grasping, which are the real sources of all our problems. We're going to have a class that explains those later in the series. By practicing the instructions on patience explained in the book, How to Solve Our Human Problem, we can transform relationships into opportunities for spiritual growth. So you might ask a question. How can we stop wanting to retaliate when someone harms us? Here's the answer. The best way to overcome our instinctive desire to retaliate is to combine patient acceptance with compassion. When someone harms us, we should not only think he is hurting me only because he is deluded. In other words, because he has the delusion of anger in his mind. But also, he is hurting himself too. So we know that because if someone is harming us, they're creating their future suffering. And if they're angry, they're completely out of control and suffering all the disadvantages of anger. And they've lost their common sense and good judgment. And they're creating terrible negative karma for themselves. Great suffering in their future lives. So they're objects of compassion for us. Through training our mind to see things in this way, compassion will spontaneously arise and all impulses towards anger and retaliation will subside. Of course, it takes a long time to do that, but if you constantly work on this every day, learning how to be patient in small things, like when you have computer problems or When there's some family member who's got a habit that you find annoying, for example, or you stub your toe, or you can't go out because of social isolation. I mean, these are wonderful ways to learn how to practice patience, to keep our mind peaceful and happy, and to pose our anger. I don't want anger in my mind. I mean, I don't have control over the fact that COVID is throughout the world. So naturally, if I want to protect myself, I want to socially isolate, wear masks, and keep myself and others protected. So no point in being annoyed about those things. We can be happy and patient and develop love and compassion for others and see it as a main spiritual practice in protecting ourselves and protecting others. When we look around us or read the newspaper, we can see innumerable examples of how through their delusions, particularly anger, people inflict untold suffering upon themselves. Delusions are completely merciless and benefit no one. These unpeaceful states of mind that we have are completely merciless and benefit no one, least of all the people who fall under their control. When we think of if we contemplate this deeply, not only will we overcome the wish to retaliate, but we will also be able to generate compassion for those who harm us. So it's very important that we learn to train our mind this way, because it is a great form of protection for us. Our mind will stay so much more comfortable, so much more peaceful and happy in the midst of everything, no matter whether it's good, no matter whether it's bad. And we can follow Geshe Cheko's advice. Always rely upon a happy mind alone. Okay, I think it's time for us to engage in liberating prayer, which is our preparatory prayer for meditation, and then some meditation on this.
O Blessed One, Shakyamuni Buddha, precious treasury of compassion, bestower of supreme inner peace, you who love all beings without exception, are the source of happiness and goodness, and you guide us to the liberating path. Your body is a wish-fulfilling jewel. Your speech is supreme purifying nectar, and your mind is refuge for all living beings. With folded hands I turn to you, supreme unchanging friend. I request from the depths of my heart, please give me the light of your wisdom to dispel the darkness of my mind, and to heal my mental continuum. Please nourish me with your goodness, that I in turn may nourish all beings with an unceasing banquet of delight. Through your compassionate intention, your blessings and virtuous deeds, and my strong wish to rely upon you. May all suffering quickly cease, and all happiness and joy be fulfilled, and may holy Dhamma flourish forevermore.
Find a comfortable meditation posture with your back straight and your hands comfortably in your lap. Ask yourself, what happens to me as I start to get annoyed, irritated, or out of sorts? What generally causes it? If we're honest with ourselves, we will discover it's because something didn't turn out the way we wanted it to. We were frustrated in getting what we wanted. And often we blame as part of the development of anger. We blame people, circumstances, things, and so forth, which we use to justify escalating our anger in our mind as we exaggerate the badness of whatever we didn't like. In the meantime, when our mind is annoyed, irritated, and developing anger, we don't feel good. We have physical symptoms. Our mind is very unhappy. And the stories we're telling ourselves are so exaggerated that then we develop this strong wish to get even or harm. And we often lose our common sense and good judgment. Like we start a fight. Or we say things that we later regret. Or we do things we often later regret. Or we get ourselves into trouble. Or we destroy something that we really like. Or lose a relationship. Anger is our worst enemy. It causes us to suffer. It causes us to cause others to suffer. And it creates our future suffering, according to the law of karma. We don't have to be a prisoner to anger. We can learn how to recognize and gradually reduce. And eventually, if we wish, we can eliminate it altogether in our mind. We have to put the teachings into practice in our daily life, beginning with the small sources of irritation and annoyance, like red lights, traffic, social distancing, wearing masks, not being able to go inside restaurants, and so forth. All of the changes we're experiencing due to COVID. We have lots of opportunity to practice. We can either let our mind just follow the bad habit of anger and annoyance, or we can choose to practice. We can recognize anger as it begins by watching our mind. And we can say to ourselves, I don't want that in my mind. I don't want to be unhappy. Anger is dangerous. I don't want to cause myself harm or others harm and create my future suffering. Instead of being annoyed, I'm going to practice patience. I'm going to keep my mind peaceful and happy and simply accept what's happening. Life doesn't happen according to me. I'm simply going to accept each situation for what it is and keep my mind peaceful and happy. I can follow Shantadeva's advice. If something can be remedied, why be unhappy? Whereas if I can fix the situation, there's no point in being unhappy. Just robs me of my reason and common sense and makes it more difficult to fix the situation. If I have my mind peaceful and happy, then it's easy to think through, okay, what steps do I need to take to fix it? Shantideva also says, and if there is no remedy for it, there's still no point in being unhappy. So I have to recognize what I can change and what I can't change. But why have my mind disturbed with anger? If I have to put up with some form of suffering, that I can't control. Join the human race. Animals have this experience all the time as well. And if I keep my mind peaceful and happy, I can reduce the suffering. I may not be able to change the situation, but I'm not layering an inner problem of anger on top of an outer problem of some form of suffering that I have to endure. And if someone harms me or tries to harm me, no point in getting angry and retaliating. That just keeps the negative karmic cycle going of anger. If I practice patience and think, whoa, that person is really suffering and creating terrible harm for themselves, much more harm for themselves than for me, because they're creating their future suffering. I can actually develop compassion. And I don't escalate the anger. I retaliate. And I protect my own mind from creating my suffering. And I can think, well, I'm exhausting this negative karma that's ripening in the form of my being harmed. Of course, if I can avoid being harmed, I'm going to do so. But I can do that with a patient and happy and loving and compassionate mind. But if I'm in the midst of being harmed, no point in getting angry. It just harms me. So thinking about that, create a strong determination. I'm going to learn how to recognize, reduce my anger, to learning how to practice patience and adding love and compassion. Just focus on that for a few moments, because we do what we wish to do. The whole point of these teachings is to be able to practice them in our daily life. I'm going to learn to recognize and reduce anger through controlling my mind and practicing patience and adding a dose of love and compassion. We can dedicate so that we're able to do this. It's a lifelong job, but one that is so worthwhile. Because having a peaceful and happy mind is a treasure. And we dedicate on behalf of every single living being. May everyone attain permanent liberation from suffering and lasting pure peace and happiness. Thank you very much for coming. Our next class will be letting go of attachment or uncontrolled desire. So that's very important because it's our uncontrolled desire that often spurs our anger on. So it's another way to help us to control anger, is when we learn how to practice contentment. We continue to make prayers for you and your family and everyone's safety and health.